Hello, everyone, from Koç University Istanbul studios. And as part of our broadcast, I have a special guest again. During our many years of friendship 20 years ago, a name that an important role in establishment of the first interaction design department in Turkey. When we speak of design and theory research, his name comes to mind first. Design issue editor, Professor Richard Buchanan from Western Reserve University. Now we are connecting to Cleveland, Ohio. Hello, Dick.
Hello.
Now our PhD student will ask questions to our guests for their own research interest. Let's start.
So we are shifting to apply and inquire design methods remotely during this COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas these methods traditionally relied on physical and embodied experiences or processes before. So how do you imagine this shift would affect the pillar design knowledge generation that we use? And these methodologies, such as participatory design or research-through design? And how do you envision these new methodologies would emerge to address such challenges?
This is coming at a difficult time everywhere. It's one of my concerns about design that we no longer have access to the kinds of experiences and engagements we've had. But I think there are no new special methodologies. We have to use our common sense, as designers always do. Right now, as we speak, I'm engaged in a design project here in the United States. It's a project concerning healthcare and improving cardiovascular outcomes, and we deal with across the entire state. So hundreds of people are involved, if not thousands, and we will do co-design. We will use Zoom to enable us to talk together and work together using classic methods of facilitation, scribing, and all the usual methods and techniques we do. It puts a special premium on the facilitator, though. And the facilitator is typically the designer, knowing how to read faces, read postures, how to ask questions, how to be personable, and to draw out the information that's needed. And the information isn't always what people say. So we like to hear their stories about their lives, what they do, and we think about what they do and how they describe it. So getting beyond what they say, but talking about what they think they do. I don't know how else to answer that. I don't think there's any easy way forward. There are no new methods or no new techniques. It's the enhancement of the tools we already have. But I do teach facilitation and scribing. I take scribing very, very seriously. It's a practice that design has and should always support. Scribing to me is not note-taking. I have little regard for note-taking in meetings. Note-takers own the meeting because they use their own language. But I believe a good scribe captures the language that's used by the participants, exactly their language. The facilitator may encourage people to speak, but always asks the scribe to capture exactly what is said by the individuals. Then there's a process of interpreting and understanding that. But that's the role of the scribe, particularly important today with Zoom, because it's easy for someone to take notes and say, well, they said this or that. The truth is that does not capture the reality that we're after. This is very similar to what doctors face, by the way. When a patient comes in and the intern, the young doctor comes in and takes notes from what the patient says, takes the notes to the doctor reads them and goes and talks to the patient. And the patient says, I never said that. What does that mean? We're seeing too much interpretation getting in the way of trying to sense what the reality of the situation is. This builds confidence with the people you work with. It also deepens your understanding. That's as best I can do for you.
Okay. So I was interested in your argument on systems analysis, showing us the problem area clearly, but not necessarily describing how to act in that problem area, in that system.
Not at all.
Yeah, one of your findings about the systems thinking, actually. So similarly in design, it is not an easy task, usually not an easy task to translate the knowledge from the research to actually design actual design outcomes. It's a professional work actually. So I was wondering, like, how do you think novice designers, such as design students or people who never applied design before, who never practiced design before, novice design thinkers maybe, how might they apply this systems thinking to their work and figure out how to act in that system?
Well, I think there's a great deal of misunderstanding about the relation of design thinking and systems thinking. I would say that designers have always worked with systems from the very earliest days. But our understanding of system is too much warped by a materialist understanding, something called general systems theory, which is a materialist understanding. Designers understand that, but have little use for it. A system is any parts that work together to a common goal. My glass is a system. I've got ice water here. It is a system. Every designer makes a system. The system is the whole of the product to be created. And so it's important to remember, though, that if you look at the orders of design, the 4 orders of design, there are some systems that are communication systems, some that are physical and artifactual systems, some that are service and action systems, like a service in a hospital or a bank. And then there are the very big systems of social organization, platforms, environments, very, very complex systems. They're all systems. And so the designer's task always is to understand what the goal is, what the parts are, how they work together, and how we can enhance the operation. So that's a straight ahead treatment of this. I think we tend to collapse systems thinking into a very narrow materialist understanding and call it general systems theory, and they have all kinds of abstract theoretical, and sometimes those are useful, sometimes they're not. But they tend to just provide a description of how complex the world is. Well, we know it's complex. Jesus, we already know that. Design is a different matter entirely. By the way, I like the piece by Vickers called The Poverty of Problem Solving. That is a very useful piece of work. And he points out that all the systems descriptions ever do, the systems analysis, just tells us how complex the situation is. Always good to know, better to know than to be ignorant, but it doesn't tell us how to act. And I've seen so many cases where systems thinkers throw up their hands and say, oh, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. There is a small article, by the way, that I recommend to everyone who's working in 3rd and 4th order design. It's by Carl Weck, and it's called Small Wins. He points out that these huge systems we always see around us, they're very complicated and difficult. But finding a small project, that can have an impact on the entire system. So I urge thinking of small wins. I do want to say, and we may talk about this more, there is a deep misunderstanding of what is a wicked problem. We may want to talk about that some more today. Does that help at all?
Yeah, actually, it really helped. I think it's kind of relates to this. I'm not really familiar with the theory, but kind of the chaos theory, maybe like some some small impact on a system might have major results.
So that's what chaos theory tries to understand mathematically, and that's interesting. By the way, there's a really great book if you're interested in systems. Where is it? Oh, here it is. This is a wonderful book. Design for a Better World, or for a Better Future, by John Body and Nina Terry. These are 2 designers in Australia, and they have such a wonderful description of what it is to work in complex systems. And I think if you want to understand this aspect, if you're working in 3rd and 4th order design, that is a great reference book to have. It's fairly new, within the last year and a half, but it is a wonderful book.
So let me then continue with my wicked problems related question.
Yes.
Application of design thinking.
You're the one.
Yeah, I am the one. Application of design thinking and agile methodologies in companies creates a wicked design space with many stakeholders with different perspectives. There appears to be a gap between theory and the practice, which makes the professionals confused. Also, it's valid for myself. They mostly have lots of information about being a design thinker or being agile, but they do not have the real experience or the necessary courage to execute these methodologies. What would be your first advice for such a person who wants to apply design thinking approach to overcome wicked problems for the first time?
Well, I would like to talk about this at some length. We're constrained by only 5 minutes, I guess, is what Oksan has said, but we should talk much more about this. I want to make a couple of points very quickly. There is a deep misunderstanding of what constitutes a wicked problem. People, the more you use a word, the less meaning it has. It becomes diffuse and different strange ideas come in. It's almost worthless. People think that wicked problems are complicated or complex situations. They are not. We have another name for those kinds of problems. We call them complex and complicated. We do not call them wicked. A wicked problem is when there are essentially contested values at stake. And by essentially contested, this is a philosophic term. It means that there are deep philosophic reasons, different assumptions about the way the world should be. And we encounter those in design. When we do, those are major problems to take on. But these are a very special class of problems. They're not just the general, oh, it's complicated. Well, shit, it's always complicated. What else is new? We live in a complicated world. But when you find conflicting values and moral purposes and philosophic understanding, that becomes wicked. For instance, we think of the relation between developmentalists and conservationists. The issues that they face together in how we develop the natural world, that is a wicked problem. And designers can tackle that kind of problem. In fact, I have a case that I worked on a little bit, but my colleague in Canada, Eric Higgs, worked on a lot in the reconstruction of a great natural park in Canada, Banff National Park. And the solution was indeed a small win, but it was the approach to a wicked problem. So I'm cautious, and young designers know nothing about wicked problems. And it's pretentious to think that one does. One faces problems and you realize the wickedness at some point, and that's fine to do. That's good to do. But I also, and I don't know if, can I add this more, Özkan? I'm troubled by the way people talk about design thinking. I think they're not using much thinking when they talk about design thinking. I believe that we teach the craft of design to everyone. There are even consultancies like IDEO that teach the craft of design. The craft has phases or steps. Usually they say steps, 5 steps, 3 steps, 8 steps. I don't, that's fine. I don't care. You do that with undergraduates, great. And I have a set of phases, by the way. I deal with 6 phases in what I teach young students. Designers, actual designers, don't follow those phases or steps. There is something else that happens with a good designer. Yes, we need those phases of the craft of design, but good designers know when they are not relevant because they think in a different way. And it has to do with what I call creativity. I used to hate that word because it was so vague and, oh, the psychologists seem to own the damn word, and it was just pointless. But I came across a very powerful philosopher who describes the career of creativity in Western culture through 4 concepts: invention, discovery, innovation, and intuition. Each of these is a different way of perceiving and changing perception. I think great designers, good designers, even middling designers, go beyond the craft of design. They think about problems in different ways. Now, I can tell you some of the techniques. I don't know if we have time for that, but I spend a lot of time with my students, doctoral and otherwise.
Maybe my question actually hits that spot. It's a great question. So you refer to design and creativity as an act of perception or a way of grasping wholeness. It is from your article. Therefore, you suggest to boost creativity, perceiving the world in new ways is necessary.
Yes.
Yet, we know that our expectations or preconceived notions of the world or concepts can shape our perceptions and
yes.
even limit them. So my question is, how can we meeting our expectations widen our perception to become more creative?
This is a wonderful, wonderful question. Really, it's a great question. First of all, on the wholeness is the system, by the way, whatever it may be, whether it's a poster or a dinnerware or a service or a complex digital platform. They're all systems. But let's go back to this notion of changing perception. You are all cursed by education. You are cursed by your education because your education has taught you some things that you believe are true. And you have a hard time giving up those expectations. That's what you're talking about. Let me give you an example of this. We must live with categories that give us fixed meanings in all we do. I could not get up in the morning and tie my shoes unless I had a categorical understanding that fixes the meaning of how I lace shoestrings together. And it's great to have categories. We live with categories. Categories belong to two intellectual arts, grammar and logic. And God love them. We got to have categories. Creativity uses a different set of terms. We use topics, what are called common and proper places. They are the way we undermine and overturn categorical meanings. So I teach my students a different kind of reasoning. I call it topical reasoning. And some time to explain that if need be, but some of it's in the literature. I've already got some things out on that. But my biggest concern is to help students get past what they think they know. And I'll tell you, my graduate students are the worst because they really think they know and they don't not know. Undergraduate students are otherwise kind of exciting because they're not so arrogant and they're not so sure. So you can actually get them to do different things sometimes. But there are tools, a very specific protocol for how we do this. And I've studied enough designers and examples that I feel very confident in this, also with deep philosophic roots. The nature of invention, the meaning of discovery, what innovation is, and how we use intuition. These are the hallmarks, I think, of great design thinking. But that's what we need. We need to break out of the fixities of students' preconceptions. But it can be done.
I'm very curious about your steps of design thinking because I was also probably tacitly thinking that design thinking is not design, but I don't have the knowledge or the background to say so. So I'm really curious about how you approach that design thinking so we can maybe better teach design thinking to non-design students. How do you apply that intuition or tacit knowledge or all the other design terms to other disciplines?
That's a great question. It's really the central question for us. I think that's the one. I believe that we teach the craft of design and certainly identifying the subject to be attended to, going through that subject and identifying a significant problem. That's important. Third phase is generating a variety of ideas. I have a whole protocol description. The fourth being developing that idea in some forms with prototypes and testing it with people. The fifth, finally, is when we have evaluated and assessed it, we begin to prepare to deliver that solution to people with certain constraints, understanding what is efficiency, effectiveness, a series of terms. And I won't go into those right now necessarily, and then finally, the implementation of a design. I've always believed that implementation is a separate design problem in and of itself. It becomes social and political in some ways, but I use 5 phases. I do have the protocol. We do teach a protocol, and everyone who's beginning to study design, whether they're in elementary school or middle school or high school or college or graduate school or business school, wherever, there is a protocol we follow. The problem is that a lot of companies like IDEO have tried to make a profit out of selling this, and the truth is it's done damage to design. Because people try these cheap tools and they say, well, it didn't make much difference. Well, of course it didn't, because it's not design. These are not gifted people. But we do have to have it as a skeleton. I'm much more interested in what good designers do within those phases. Within those phases, that's where design thinking takes place. And I think it has to do with changing perceptions, as I said before, and you asked that question, I believe it is about changing perception. And the change of perception can be sensate, meaning that it comes from the senses. It can also be intellective, what we call intellective, in the mind. The mind can see something. Either the senses or the mind sees something new. But to do that, we have to find a way to melt down our categorical expectations. And there are tools for this. We have a tradition of these tools in Western culture. It's not discussed very much. We keep it a secret, but it's a very powerful set. I call these topics or commonplaces in contrast to categories. Categories fix the meaning, topics melt the meaning. And I can give you some examples of how we play with these and use them. And so when I'm working with a group, I will go through the protocol. I know how to handle the protocol. We get people talking. But within that, I know what I'm looking for in the conversations with participants. And I want to help them to find it for themselves. That's a key matter. And the 4 orders is an example of that. It's not the only, but an example of that. So learning to think with topics is a key matter for me. I can give you an example of this. In the 1960s in the United States, there was, we talked about old people. Old people. My age, old people.
Oh, come on, Richard.
We used to talk about old people. There was a group in Chicago that said, this is a funny thing to be doing. Maybe we should think about this again. So what they did, they built 2 columns of words. On the left, they had old. On the right, they had young. And under each of these, they put forward a sentence or a proposition or a word that indicated that. So, and you could come up with 50 or 60 words for old. Without teeth, incontinent, no longer learning, sick all the time. You can go on and on, just terrible things. On the right, the words for young. Oh, you also just have to use incontinent because babies pee all the time. But you have still learning, lots of energy, active, growing. You build this list and then ask yourself, what happens if I take the head of one list and put it on the other list? And the head of the other list, put it on this list. So everything you had called old, let us now call that young. And everything you had called young will now have the word old above it. The problem is to go through and make a sentence for each of the words that were used. Make a sentence that has some intelligibility to it. And I will promise you, 50 or 60 of them will be just nonsense, crazy. But once in a while, you form a sentence that makes you stop and wonder, And that's what happened in Chicago. They came across the one that said, old people are no longer learning. And the group stopped and thought about this and said, well, is that true? My grandma, she seems to be very active in learning. I don't quite know how that works. It doesn't make sense. The more they thought about it, the more they thought this was a place for creative work. They went to the government and proposed a program. And we had a program back in the 50s, 60s, I guess it was, called Head Start. It was for kids in kindergarten, before kindergarten, to help them get active and begin learning. And they decided to create a Head Start for old people. But they didn't call it Head Start because that would be, condescending and stupid. But it had similar structures and practices. So the government said, let's try it. And they gave them some money. They did this, and after 2 or 3 years, they went back and looked at the results of this. And there were 3 really significant results. One, there were fewer reports of illnesses. Not a lot of difference, but statistically significant. And I use this phrase, as doctoral students, you'll know what statistically significant means. Number 2, the mortality rate was lower. fewer people died in that group compared to another group. Again, not huge numbers, but statistically significant. The third result is that students in that new program reported that they were happier. I do not know how to quantize that. Anyone stupid enough to try to quantize that probably belongs in a hospital. It's a waste of time, but it was significant to report being happy. And this told them that there's something really wrong with the category we use to describe these people. We call them old people, meaning they were done, discarded through. That was the beginning of a change in the United States to no longer talk about old people, but to speak about the elders. The elders, a word that we ought to know, and we do know. Today, it would be very embarrassing to talk about old people because companies know that they need their older workers. They need the elders who keep knowledge and sustain knowledge. They bring great advantage, moral stability, and purpose. They always know something special about the history of the organization or the subject. So the word changed socially. The category, old people, changed to become elders. That is a really powerful example, I think, of what we're talking about in this practice. So this is just one technique. Column of words, change the headings of the columns. Anything that makes you try some things out, and as silly as they may seem, 50 times, it may seem silly. 51, you stop and scratch your head and say, I don't know quite what that means. That's the beginning of a design project. So this is what I mean by design thinking. The ability to take a situation where everything is fixed by categories, everyone knows the damn truth, everybody knows it. Graduate students, doctoral students do dissertations on this, on old people. Yeah, but the truth, the reality, hinges on a different perception.
Then you mentioned that you go on for 50 times to try out 50 times something, and you just find an insight on the 51st time, maybe. But how can we, I'm not sure, how can we find the courage to go on for 50 times and to find, how do I know I will find something at the 51st time?
Well, this is where design thinking becomes valuable. Someone who's an experienced designer does have the courage to go on. I know that Charles and Ray Ames, for instance, made many, many mistakes. They did many examples. In design, we know prototype, evaluate, prototype, evaluate, prototype, evaluate, and then prototype, evaluate again. We keep this experimentation going and keep looking for possibilities. That takes courage, I grant you that. It takes funding. We need a client who's willing, but that's what design is all about. So it can be done, and it does take courage. And I do believe that there is an aspect of character in design thinking, design as a whole, because it's not something most people do. But I do believe there is a whole domain of design in between what we call natural sciences and the social sciences. There's a whole domain of human making. And most universities don't understand it, don't appreciate it, but it comes with a complete way of working in the world with elements of character, like courage.
Let me ask the last questions. I don't know if it is necessary to say that we spend days like in a science fiction movies. In this mood, as a design philosopher, how do you see the future?
Let me say that there was an earlier question about the relation of theory and practice. Someone asked that. I forget which one of you asked about theory and practice? Put a hand up. Who asked about that? Oh, don't be shy, for goodness sake, say it.
Hold on.
Okay, I believe that distinction of theory and practice belongs to the 19th century. We are well past that, and many people don't realize how old-fashioned that is. We no longer worry about the relation of theory and practice. We want ideas and how we can do things in the world. Our world has changed in its fundamental terminology for how we live. Design arose precisely at the time of the 19th century ending. We broke down the divisions of theory and practice and realized that production or making was the middle term. It is an entirely new way of seeing the world, and we will not give it up. As we begin the 21st century, we have deepened our exploration of just exactly that revolution from the 20th century. Our concern now is with increasing concerns with data, information, and experimentation, technological experimentation and social experimentation. We are deep into a new world of experimentation, guided by not theory and practice, because those are no longer useful terms. They're old-fashioned, because everyone thinks, has ideas, and we have the urge to do something, and we make things. So everything around us is being rebuilt. That's the exciting future I see. We're going to rebuild the goddamn world. And it's going to be a better world because of books like this and people like you. We're going to rethink that future because that is the future, frankly. We cannot go backward. We live in the legacy of old thinking. And it's the new thinking that designers bring that will save us in this. And we make big mistakes sometimes in design. We make some really bad mistakes. But on the whole, we do pretty well. And you ought to feel very good about this. I would say that we want to introduce ethics more seriously into our design education and consideration, but that's for another design talk.
Thank you so much, Dick. In this section of our series, we hosted world-renowned design philosopher, Professor Richard Buchanan. Have a good day from Koç Üniversitesi İstanbul studios.
Thank you very much.